Hello, everyone. This is your host, Manoj Tandon. Welcome to another episode of Dark Rhino Security Confidential. Today, we are honored to have Bec McKeown join us. Bec is joining us all the way from the United Kingdom. She is a chartered psychologist with 20 years of experience researching and evaluating human performance in high-risk, high-stakes organizations, including organizations like the UK Ministry of Defence. She's an expert on the ways humans behave when working in highly complex, uncertain, and ambiguous environments. And human performance on cybersecurity is really her cup of tea, and we're really eager to hear her take on it. She also established Mind Science, which is an organization that's designed to assist companies at the operational and strategic levels. Welcome to the show, Bec. Thank you for joining us.
And thank you very much for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Wow, there's just so much to talk about. We have an honest to God psychologist, but so we're stateside, we do things a little differently. One of the things that we want to understand is, give us your background. What's a chartered psychologist? We've heard of and I've heard this, like in the UK, they call them chartered accountants. In the United States, we call them certified public accountant, CPA. So what's a chartered psychologist?
Yeah, it's kind of similar, I guess, in a way. The chartered bit is because I'm a member of the British Psychological Society, and I had to go through a whole load of stuff to get chartered status, so my experience, my qualifications. And basically, it means that it's a legal recognition of my specialism and a guarantee that I deliver the highest quality standards. That's the blurb that's written on the BPS website. So it's just an acknowledgement that I haven't just got qualifications in psychology, I've also got an in-depth experience. So you've got some sort of quality check when you have somebody who's a chartered psychologist. Psychology covers lots of different areas. We've all heard of clinical psychologists and forensic psychologists. It's all none of that. My master's degree is in applied psychology, and what that means is that I take all of the theory and the science of psychology and apply it to real world problems associated with the way that people behave. And for me, that's the beauty of it. It's taking the theory and applying it. So it's not just sitting in an ivory tower reading books and discussing theory. It's proper real world stuff.
So you can help us with practical outcomes.
Yes, that's a very good way of putting it, and I shall steal that and write it down.
Yeah, that's a very good thing, because the last time I took a psychology class was back in college, and I was like, well, how do I make this work?
Yeah.
So this is fantastic. But let me ask you, as a psychologist, and you've studied the human brain or human behavior, I'm going to use a wrong choice of words here, but you can correct me. It almost seems like human behavior is chaotic. There's coherence is difficult to achieve. How do you control that chaos? Or am I thinking the wrong way about it?
I don't know if it's about controlling chaos. I think it's about understanding where it comes from. And it is a bit chaotic because everybody is different. Individuals have different personality traits, different experiences. And I think the most frustrating thing really is the fact that we think we're consistent in our behaviour, and we're absolutely not. We do change very much according to the situation that we're in. And I think as you start to learn these things and to recognise those sort of characteristics, it becomes less chaotic because you can at least explain it even if you can't understand it.
Wow. So are you saying that even if we've drilled behaviors in over time, like having a cup of coffee every morning because that's your thing, you do it, we might not follow that pattern? We would break that pattern in certain circumstances?
Yeah,
people are creatures of habits. They always do the same thing over and over again, and then when it's out of their habit zone, they become chaotic.
Yes, but sometimes even those habits don't really work that way. I'm sure you've done this. I know I've done this when you've made your morning cup of coffee, but your mind is elsewhere. You're thinking about what you're going to do at work that day, or when you've got to pick the kids up for school. And then all of a sudden you find that you've put the milk in the coffee cup, but no actual coffee. Or you
I
put
have actually
the
done that.
coffee jar in the fridge. That's called a slip. And that's because you've got this automatic thing that you're doing, but because your brain is busy doing other stuff, it's made a slip. And then you think, what on earth is going wrong with me? Am I crazy? But no, it's just you're busy thinking about something else. So it's all about the way the actual brain operates. I call it the cogs and dials, because it almost is, it's kind of a very finely tuned engineered instrument, really, isn't it, to a certain extent?
Yeah.
And I think if we start thinking of the brain like that, then it all becomes a little bit clearer as to how it works. And if you know how it works and how it impacts on your behaviour, then you can recognise why you start to do things, and then you can put things in place to make it different or more effective.
See, at Dark Rhino Security, about half our workforce is former military. Okay, and those guys, when you talk to them about their training, a lot of it was highly regimented and very repetitive. I'm going to summarize a ton of conversations over the last 6 years by simply putting it as that you want to take the mind out of decision making in a high pressure situation. That's kind of how so that you're reactive. It's no longer, you're not putting thought into it.
Yeah.
It's already decided the cascade of events that's going to take place when you're faced with a certain situation.
Yeah, the drill is the automatic response. So it's a very quick, it's a very effective response because, like you say, it's automatic. There's no thought in there. And it becomes automatic through training and doing it repeatedly.
But how do as you mentioned, that we're not consistent in our response. So how do we actually ensure that the outcome is going to be what we want? Or is that asking too much?
It's kind of, a thing I say a lot is, yeah, maybe, or yes and no, because there's never a straightforward answer in psychology. Now, I actually did a review of some military training, and those drills are fabulous when it comes to things like learning how to load and shoot a rifle, for example. And, it becomes repetitive. You don't need to think about it. However, when you're learning things like equality and diversity, it's a very different thing because there's a lot of emotion involved. There's experience, your own background, your upbringing, all of that sort of thing. It isn't a simple process of steps. And when you look at how those two things are training the shooting the rifle thing is great. That works for that. That type of training will never work for equality and diversity because we're all different. We've got different backgrounds. So that's kind of where the difference sits with military. That there's a whole bunch of stuff, knowledge-based, that you can train, and that works so well. But there's other stuff that you need to kind of learn by making mistakes. But you absolutely don't want people making mistakes when they're learning how to use a rifle because bad things happen.
Yeah, really bad things.
It's understanding that actually, and this is something else that I find utterly fascinating, is that we have a view of training that comes from the way that we were schooled, what we did at universities, how we were trained in our jobs. And actually, it's very effective for some things, but it's not effective for everything. And I think that's an important thing to understand. And we'll go on to talk about that a little bit when we talk about wicked problems and cybersecurity in general, because it's a kind of a different situation.
So is there in your vast experience in the world of cyber, and we'll focus on that, is there a baseline response that happens to teams under pressure?
What I'd like to do first, before I sort of kind of answer that question, is explain just how the brain works.
Please
because then
do.
You'll understand what the baseline of response is. The brain's hardwired to respond to threats. So back in the days where we were running away to our caves, away from the saber-toothed tiger, the threat was easy to see. Cybersecurity, the threat's very different, and it might not be immediately apparent. But when the realization dawns, maybe, but something is going on in the system, and it looks like we're under threat from a cyber attack, what happens is the brain produces an automatic response. And there's a tiny part of the brain called the amygdala, and that sends signals all the way down the spinal cord to the adrenal gland. Adrenal gland produces adrenaline. We're all familiar with that. And I think you'll also be familiar with the term fight or flight response.
Yeah.
So it's actually fight, flight, or freeze. And that response kicks in when adrenaline starts flowing. So when adrenaline levels go up, your sense and reasoning goes down. And that happens because when the brain's under threat, it does what we call cognitive narrowing. So it narrows your focus down onto the threat and the things that are going on around it, and you stop taking notice of everything else that's around you. So that is something that happens to everybody in a situation of threat. Now, the extent to which that's going to happen is going to depend on the type of threat, if you've seen it before, if you've got experience in dealing with it, and if you're confident and you know what you're going to do, then that response will be less. But for somebody who's quite inexperienced, you might find that panic sets in and they just do nothing, or they might be compelled to do lots of things, but they'll all be the wrong things because they haven't thought it through, they've just reacted. Or it could be that they're more experienced and they know to look for certain cues that are going to tell them this is the situation that's going on. So that's kind of a baseline response. I'm not sure if that's a great answer, but
no, that's actually that's a great answer. It's a very interesting answer on thinking about it in that way. That under pressure, if you don't have familiarity with what's happening, then you'll make decisions or you'll freeze. And if the decisions you'll make can very likely be the wrong decisions.
Yeah, or not optimal. Or it might well be that, yeah.
Right. Or it's going to come down to past experience and gut feel, and it'll just be, okay, which for all of us who run a securities operations center is something we don't want to hear, because that's a problem. When you look at cybersecurity teams, there is diversity on those teams, on experience levels, backgrounds, past life experiences, training, how they receive training. Whereas we may have someone senior who has worked at U.S. Cyber Command and has faced all kinds of craziness, but then we may have a new, fresh person out of university who's starting off as an analyst, who's has read everything about it, and their mind is full of all this information, but they haven't actually had the experience of a real bullet being shot at them, right? So you want to make sure that, and often the first responders, I want to say, have the lowest level of experience because they're the eyes on glass. That's the first position a lot of people start off with in the world of cybersecurity.
Yeah.
So how do we structure a team that's going to work here with that kind of a baseline response? I mean, it seems like you want to turn the team upside down, take your most senior people and put them on the front line and have
everybody else at the back.
Everybody. I mean, how do we do this?
Yeah. So don't turn the team on its head. But what it is, it's about how do you pass on that experience to the team, because that's what it's about. Because I think also those at the top are hugely busy people these days. Limited time, limited resource, 1,001 jobs to do. Everybody wants a piece of them, and then they've got to go and look after, or train that person. And what we've found in researching decision making is it's about how do you pass on that experience when you don't even necessarily understand what your gut reaction is. And that itself, I think, is quite a fascinating subject, because what's automatic
go
to
more
one
into
person,
that, please.
Yeah,
go more into that, please.
There is a fabulous book, a chap called Daniel Kahneman, and it's called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. And I'm going to have words with him about commission for this book, because I recommend it to everybody. But it's a really good way of understanding how the brain works. And he gives an example of a firefighter that's in a burning building with his team. They're dealing with the fire. And all of a sudden, he shouts, "Everybody out." And they all run out. And then the floor collapses. So had they stayed in, they would have all died. And afterwards, the question was, well, how did you know? And it took him quite a lot of thinking to realise that the fire had got noisy and the heat was coming from below. So whilst they thought the fire was behind the wall in front of them, it wasn't. It was actually underneath them. But it was those two cues of it being loud and noisy and heat rising made him think, gosh, we're in danger. But that was an automatic recognition of those factors, and he got everybody out. Had he not had the experience of that, he wouldn't have known that, and many people would have lost their lives. And that is the benefit of having intuition. Intuition is experience. It's something that you know so well, it's become automatic and you don't think about it. So in terms of the so what of this story is really, that's the sort of level of intuition and knowledge that you want to be passing down the line. So how do you do that when you don't even consciously recognize it yourself? And what military do is a thing called an after-action review. You've probably heard of it. I know the US military do it too. But it's the way that that debrief is done afterwards that you would have those questions with everybody. What happened? What was supposed to happen? Who did what at what point? And you do that along a timeline. And then because everybody's involved in that review, people who are younger and don't have so much experience get to listen to those stories, because narrative is a very, very powerful way of understanding things. Rather than a list of bullet points in a report, to have those stories, that's kind of how you pass on the learning. You're never going to get that in a classroom. And that to me is the beauty of using psychology to understand how to get teams to learn and be more effective, because we're doing it in such a way that works with the way that the brain works.
So what would we do in a practical sense then to pass along that tribal knowledge from the, because here's the problem that I see as a layperson, a non-psychologist, is that context is the most difficult thing to share. If I could give you my context, you would understand what I'm saying and there'd be no uncertainty to it. It's a consultant's dilemma, is how do you, when you're advising, how do you pass on that context? Because people won't have the same. And if I'm hearing you right, you're suggesting that you can somehow.
Yes, you can. While I was working for the university a few years back, I came across a thing called cognitive agility.
Okay.
And it's 3 different components to it. So you've got advanced thinking skills, that's critical thinking type skills, how to do decision testing and all of that side of things. Then you've got a relationship building component, which is how to build relationships with a diverse team, because it's not always easy. But then there's also a thing called metacognition. And what that means, it's about understanding where your learning is, what you know, what you don't know, and how you need to learn. And part of the process of obtaining that is to do lots and lots and lots of different scenarios. And as you do that and you examine what you've learned, you start to see those underlying patterns. And that's where the context falls away and you have what we call adaptive expertise. So it's the ability to take those experiences and use them across a range of different situations, even if they look different on the surface. So it's about really regular training and listening to those stories. You start to learn the patterns.
And I'll tell you one, we've done these things in the past, and we've actually taken casualties in great people when we've done them. They've actually come back and said they don't want to do this. Like that, there was a mindset that, oh, I want to be this in cybersecurity. I want to be on the red team. But when we put them in real simulations or real tabletop exercises, we've had a handful of people that have said, you know what? I don't think I'm going to adapt to this whatsoever.
Yeah, it's not for me.
It's not for me. Now, is there now, is there a way that we could actually, I guess, for lack of a better term, save those people? Because a lot of them are brilliant engineers, or they're brilliant. They're just brilliant at what they do,
Mhm.
but they're not comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's a phrase I use a lot. Yeah. And I think really for me, it's about you can't make everybody and shape them into the role. Maybe it's about having people who are comfortable with being uncomfortable on the team. And then those who are not quite so comfortable in that are on the team, but maybe have a different role within the team. So, I mean, that's what you've just described is very much a decision making style thing. Some people like to have all of the information, all of the facts, then they'll make a decision. Other people are far happier to make a decision on the fly as they go. Now, if you've got a cybersecurity response team where you've got 5 people who are like to make decisions slowly and one who makes it fast, you're going to have conflict because the group that makes decisions slowly don't like the way that the other person does it. So it's kind of about understanding what those mix of people that you have on that team, working out who's best for which type of role. And so everybody plays to their strengths. And then also what you get is a reduction in friction between team members because they understand why people don't necessarily agree with them or want to do things their way. And by working together towards that sort of thing, you find that everything smooths out a little bit.
Do you, so is that something, um, is there a formal process by which that exercise can take place, or is that kind of a manager's discretion? Uh,
I think it depends on the company, it depends on the organisation. And I think also, you know, the organisation's culture. What do you want to do to build teams? Do you want to build high performing teams? Are you going to put the resource and the effort into doing that? And I think it's probably more difficult for people who have teams that come together just to deal with a response. They don't work as teams normally.
right.
So it's more difficult for them because they don't have those relationships. They don't understand each other and why they, you know, think their own particular role is more important. So for me, if you've got a team that doesn't work together often, it's well worth doing something like that because what you're going to have is much more effective team at the end of it. And is it difficult? Yes and no. Here we go again. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of this I found is that once you understand what's going on and you understand why people react the way they do, it really breaks down those barriers between people. Um, and you realise, certainly this is how I did this years ago, and I suddenly realised that the colleague I had that used to get on my nerves, something terrible, it's like, oh, everything was so difficult. All of a sudden, I understood why that colleague felt like that and thought like that. And then you tend to see it as, well, actually, we're mutually very compatible because that colleague brings one set of skills and I bring a complementary set, and together we make a great team. And it's kind of the similar principle, really, when you're bringing together teams to deal with a crisis.
That that is good advice, but that means that everybody that has a vested interest has to get engaged in building that team. Uh, um, it can't be a solo decision making process, because then there's no
No,
team.
no, and that's part of it, really. And I think that um, people never sort of seem to understand the benefits of it. It's not about sending people away on team days that are hugely expensive and putting them up in nice hotels and buying them lots of lovely dinners. It can be just small things like 1 or 2 hours, you know, every couple of weeks to have a little run through of a decision and just test that. And that slow building up of that relationship means that they get to know each other better. Then when the bad thing happens, all of those little ups and downs and all of the disagreements in the way things are done, that's out the way. You've dealt with that in slow time and you're there then as a very effective team.
That's So more practice and get the team to be comfortable with each other.
Yes.
And that's right out of special forces training. That's
What can I say?
that they would. That's the same approach that they would go ahead and take.
Yeah.